When I made a video about this humpback whale that recently died on the Central Oregon coast, and the way that whale enthusiasts, cetacean stan Twitter was just being like so overtly, horrifically racist towards the Siletz people, toward Indigenous people in general, and how this was not atypical for whale enthusiast discourse to go, that it's all very, very strongly steeped in an anti-Indigenous bias. And then I made a follow-up video on the macaw people and their attempts to get their rights restored to be able to hunt gray whales, and how hard people have fought against that, and how all of that kind of like animal rights activism very much overlaps with vegan activism, and this belief that like animals are, I don't know. I'm going to be real careful here because I don't want to conflate people who love whales, love whale watching, or people who are like cetacean researchers, biologists. I'm not conflating that with these kind of whale enthusiasts who want to have their whale sanctuaries and are all over Twitter being like absolutely horrifically racist. The same way I don't want to conflate your average vegan with a vegan activist online. Yeah, we're all capable of having nuance in this conversation and not painting with too broad of a brush, right? But in that video, I talked about how there's an awful lot of white supremacy in this whale enthusiast community, and it's not dissimilar to the white supremacy in the vegan activist community. I've said many, many times that there is a veganism to alt-right pipeline. There is a veganism to white supremacy pipeline. And actually I had somebody in my comments earlier who was like, oh, well, I'm a Black vegan, and, I don't like how you're always throwing vegans under the bus. The fact that there are non-white people who are vegans doesn't mean that a veganism to alt-right pipeline, a veganism to white supremacy pipeline doesn't exist. It's the same way I come from the crunchy mom community. I like to think of myself as a scrunchy mom who believes in science, but I am also able to understand that that community is a huge alt-right pipeline. The crunchy mom to alt-right pipeline is, y'all, it is swift and it is steep. But I also understand that there are people in that space who are not being sucked down an alt-right pipeline, but we have to be aware that anytime an ideology is trying to limit, trying to dictate to other people what they can and can't eat or wear, how they have to look, it's trying to dictate, especially to other cultures, about the goodness, cleanness, and morality of their food. That is always, always going to be an alt-right pipeline. And when we look at this kind of like whale stand sphere, especially folks who are fighting against Indigenous people having their whaling rights restored, or in the case of the story I was talking about, Indigenous people being able to take the baleen and blubber and bones from a whale that had to be euthanized. And we're looking at those folks. And then we're also looking at the vegan activists who are trying to tell Indigenous people that their cultural food choices, their traditional foods are unacceptable, immoral. That is a white supremacist pipeline. That's white supremacy on full display. The amount of racism against Indigenous people, the desire from both these like whale folks and also vegan activists to erase entire cultures, because you come in with your colonizer mindset telling Indigenous people your traditional foodways are ones that I find immoral. I find them to be wrong. And I'm going to tell you, you don't have a right to eat your traditional foods, even though you have, from time immemorial, a connection to your food that is on a level that we colonizers couldn't possibly understand, even though you are some of the strongest activists for conservation of marine mammals. Even though you understand far better than we do how to eat sustainably, to respect the food that you are consuming, to have a tremendous amount of honor and compassion and respect for the animals that you are consuming, we're going to come in and tell you you're wrong and bad and immoral, and you need to move beyond your traditional foods, and you need to eat how we tell you. Highly processed foods that are, absolutely the product of the deaths of how many animals. Because if you're looking at it just like 1 to 1 to 1, right, the cultivation of plant foods results in the deaths of far more animals than, harvesting a cow. 6 people in my family eat half a cow for a year, and 1 lamb or half a hog. So what, 2 animals die for a family of 6? Do you know how many animals die to produce grains and vegetables? Do you have any insight into that? Likewise, 1 whale can feed an entire village. And not only that, all parts of the whale will be used in a way that is respectful and honoring. But this white colonizer, white supremacist mindset of like, we can tell Indigenous people, we can come in and cast judgment and stop Indigenous people. We can say that you are bad and we are good and you must eat how we think you should eat. Like, how is that not racism? How is that not colonialism on full display? Let me read this full comment again here. Veganism dripping in white supremacy is something I agree with 1,000,000%. The claim of if you eat animals, you don't really love and respect them is a slap in the face to Indigenous communities. Right. So I think they're saying that my claim that veganism is dripping in white supremacy is something that they agree with, not that they agree with veganism. I hope I wasn't confusing there. I agree. So this, my son and I were talking about this. He's taking an Indigenous studies class right now. And we've discussed this issue an awful lot, right? As a 17-year-old Indigenous person who cares very much about sustainable food cultivation, we talk about these issues an awful lot. And he's always very quick to remind me that it is a very white, Eurocentric, Christian perspective to falsely, wrongly believe that human beings are separate from nature, that we are above nature, that we should be dominating nature. It is very much a settler colonialist way of thinking to come in and tell Indigenous people that they are not inextricably linked to the food that they harvest and eat. This idea of if you respect animals, you wouldn't eat them is very much a white colonizer mindset. Right. He would say that Indigenous people have always and continue to understand that they are not separate from nature, that they are connected to the food that they harvest and eat, and therefore must do so in a respectful way, in a way that is sustainable. It's white people who want to exploit and extract resources, who don't understand that we have to leave enough for others and we have to leave enough for the future, and we only take what we need. It's white European settlers that brought capitalism to the United States, that brought our current exploitive system. The white Eurocentric mindset to believe that we should have dominion over nature, when the reality is that we are part of nature, and our efforts to divorce ourselves from her are only going to lead to suffering, have only created suffering for us and for the planet. That rift, that chasm that we have created between ourselves and nature has only served to harm us both. In fact, in the second video I made, I was talking about the Makah tribe from the Pacific Northwest up on the peninsula, and how they have been seeking for decades to get their whaling rights restored, whaling rights that they secured in an 1855 treaty with the United States government. And they were able to apply this year. Their application is being processed now in 2025 after having given up whaling in 1920. There are these white whale activist, enthusiast, whatevers who are trying to stop them. They've been fighting the Makah people for decades to prevent them from harvesting up to 4 whales every year from a stable population. It is white people coming in saying you can't eat your traditional foods, but also white people who are refusing to address the real pressures on gray whales. Primarily entanglement in fishing nets. By the way, I believe that humpback whale that washed up here in Oregon last week was entangled in fishing gear. Number 1, entanglement with fishing equipment. Number 2, being struck by boats. Number 3, harassment and stress from whale watching. Number 4, things like algal blooms from pollution. Like these are the real risks to whales. And the Makah people know that. There has been no stronger force for conservation of gray whales than the Makah people. In fact, they gave up whaling in the 1920s before everybody else because they had such a close connected relationship with the whale population. They saw the numbers going down and they were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. For the sake of the whales that we honor and care for, we have to stop harvesting them, because we can see that they're in trouble. The Makah people saw that before the US government did, before white folks did, because they had not divorced themselves from nature, because they understand that they are connected to nature. They are connected to the whales. It is such a false belief to think that if you really love and respect animals, you wouldn't eat them. That's a white European mindset, and I'm going to challenge it every time. When we start telling people what they can and cannot eat, when we start telling in particular Indigenous people that their traditional foods are immoral and that they don't have a right to eat them, that's an alt-right white supremacist pipeline. That is the whale stan and veganism to white supremacy pipeline on full display. Sorry if that makes other vegans uncomfortable. Maybe you need to check folks in your community who are falling down that pipeline. Maybe you need to work maybe you need to work to unpack the white supremacy that is so prevalent in the spaces that you inhabit, in the ideology that you take up.